Riverman continued, regarding the Mississippi River. The governor sank into a deep despondency at sight of the difficulties that presented themselves to his reaching the sea, and, what was worse, from the way in which the men and horses were diminishing in numbers, he could not sustain himself in the country without help. The expedition of Hernando de Soto in southeastern North America, 1539 to 1543. A true relation of the vicissitudes that attended the governor Don Hernando de Soto and some nobles of Portugal. Finally, the fourth course was a piece of wild ox, the fattest morsels of which were placed in our mouths. After this feast, we had to go to visit the whole village, which consists of fully 300 cabins. While we walked through the streets, an orator continually harangued to oblige all the people to come to see us without annoying us. Everywhere we were presented with belts, garters, and other articles made of the hair of bears and cattle, dyed red, yellow, and gray. As they are of no great value, we did not burden ourselves with them. Voyage du Père Jacques Marquette, 1673 to 1675. The river's earliest commerce was in great barges. It gave employment to hordes of rough and hardy men, rude, uneducated, brave, suffering terrific hardships with sailor-like stoicism, heavy drinkers, coarse frolickers, heavy fighters, reckless fellows, every one, elephantinely jolly, foul-witted, profane, prodigal of their money, bankrupt at the end of the trip, fond of barbaric finery, prodigious braggarts, yet in the main honest, trustworthy, faithful to promises and duty, and often picturesquely magnanimous. Mark Twain, Life on the Mississippi. The Mississippi is much more than a ribbon of water. It is a watershed that drains all or parts of 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces. It is the dominant watershed in North America and drains 41% of the continental United States. It is the third largest watershed in the world. The name Mississippi comes from the Anishinaabe people, Ojibwe Indians. They called the river Mississippi or Mississippi, which means big river or father of waters. U.S. National Park Service. A river is the sum of all it gathers on its course. At the port of New Orleans, only 100 miles from the Mississippi's mouth, you can stand on the levee and understand clearly why its health is so vital to our economy and environment. The Walton Family Foundation. Long before the first European explorer reached the majestic sweep of the Mississippi River, Native Americans were using it for travel and trade. The Mississippi River has evolved since then into a transportation gateway to the interior of the United States. A fleet of over 10,000 barges, towed by as many as 2,000 towboats, ply the river with many different kinds of cargo. There are nearly 6,000 miles of navigable river in the Mississippi River Basin, servicing the Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio, Illinois, Arkansas, Tennessee, White, Cumberland, Alabama, and Minnesota rivers. Through this system, river transportation reaches into every Corn Belt state, providing easy access to 80% of the U.S. corn production, more than 30% of sorghum production, and up to 15% of barley production. Hundreds of river terminals receive feed grains by truck or rail and transferred into barges, each carrying approximately 1,500 tons, which are collected into tows of 6 or more barges and moved downriver to New Orleans or another river port. U.S. Grains Council. The Mississippi River Delta and coastal Louisiana are disappearing at an astonishing rate. A football field of wetlands vanishes into the open water every 100 minutes. Since the 1930s, Louisiana has lost over 2,000 square miles of land, an area roughly the size of Delaware. Many factors have contributed to this collapse. One of the most significant causes of land loss is the straitjacketing of the lower Mississippi River with huge levees to control the river and protect communities, economic infrastructure, and other resources from river flooding. MississippiRiverDelta.org. This land being swallowed by the Gulf is home to half of the country's oil refineries, a matrix of pipelines that serve 90% of the nation's offshore energy production and 30% of its total oil and gas supply, a port vital to 31 states, and 2 million people who would need to find other places to live. The Scientific American. The benefits of the Mississippi River are not evenly distributed. Some communities have prospered from the productive soils and recreational opportunities, while others are challenged by industrial toxins, polluted drinking water, and exacerbated flooding. The McKnight Foundation. This is life in Cancer Alley, an 85-mile stretch along the banks of the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, where industry leaders like ExxonMobil, Coke, and Shell operate about 150 fossil fuel and petrochemical facilities. 7 of the 10 census tracts with the highest cancer risk in the nation are found here. The exceptionally elevated toxic air emissions released by the industry are linked to a host of ailments, from cancer to cardiovascular and respiratory disease to reproductive and developmental disorders. Toxic facilities are increasingly concentrated in areas with the highest percentage of Black and poor residents. Rolling Stone. Riverman by Mark Seghers. For my children, and R. Manna, and Clyde Margolis, Trent Shreve, Kara Ashley, Richard Gardner, Robert McLean, and so many, many others. Their advice and enthusiasm for this project are beyond valuation. Regarding language, mercy on the reader requires an explanation of accents in this book. In the late 20th century, the time of this telling, Mississippi rivermen hail from small towns and open places along roads that track through the river's vast drainage, which is about half the nation, and gather their accents just upstream from New Orleans. Northern Midwesterners bring a Scandinavian lilt. Illinois, Ohio, Missouri, and other parts Midwestern send their sons clear, snappy American, but also their country drawl. Dixie sends its twang. But what soaks conversation on the towboats and fleets of barges from Baton Rouge to the Gulf of Mexico is the variety of accents of South Louisiana. Contrary to popular misconception, it does not sound like the rest of the Deep South. For centuries, Southeast Louisiana, and particularly Greater New Orleans, has blended Irish, Italian, Spanish, and French into a softer version of the northeastern urban accent. It is called, without rigorous study, Yat and sometimes Kunas, a diction that banishes both grammar and the crisp edges of proper American. Hence, New Orleans becomes New Orleans, or New Orleans, and almost never the Nolans so often written. Brother or bro become bruh. The first person I surrenders to ah, and so we'll have al and Contractions lose their final sound, creating the softer couldn't, shouldn't, and wouldn't. The suffix ing, as in going or wanting, is as rare as a poet. Going and wanting are happy to replace them. And regarding the changes, generally speaking, folks are rarely all right, so much as they are aight. West of Greater New Orleans, almost all the way to Texas, the Cajun accent infiltrates. Infused with pidgin French, it maintains a soft old country patois. In modern times, many Cajuns roll in and out of their French and their accents for convenience and effect. South Louisiana blacks add another layer. They have accents particular to their locales, more Cajun in southwestern Louisiana, more Kunas elsewhere. New Orleans blacks have their own version of that city's dialect. Of course, education, though scarce on the river at the time of this telling, hammers all down to Midwestern American, the standard, no matter where the victim lives, and permits only a few idiosyncrasies, even in New Orleans.